I'm going to ask you questions as we go along, and I'd love for you to type some comments into the chat bar so I can get some feedback from you about what's going on in your company. I won't tell anyone who you are, but I'd love to hear back from you as we're going along. Make this a really valuable 1 hour for you so that all of you get as much out of it as possible, and so that I can relate this as specifically back to your company as possible. So if any of you would like to, keep along, write some things along in the chat box. I'd love to hear from you how many underperforming teams you actually have. Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 4, 6? Believe it or not, I hear from many companies that have multiple underperforming teams. So I just heard from Deborah. She said 1 out of 5. That's pretty typical. 20%. Very often, 20% of companies tell me, that 20% of their teams aren't hitting their potential. Jackie said 2 out of 5. So that's 40% of your firm. And when you realize that it's 40% of your firm, well, potentially 40% of your firm, depends on how many people are in each of the teams and how much revenue they are contributing to your company. It could be actually a lot more than that, or it could be less, depends. But if you can do something that's going to help that team to turn around their performance and start moving up their metrics, it's going to make a big difference to your firm's bottom line. So I'm just going to share my screen with you right now, and let's get started. There we go, turning around an underperforming team. And I love this picture here. It shows, you might have all of these different groups. Maybe your company is, depending on how it's organized, you might just have one group. You might have multiples. You really don't want to see them having negative numbers, but that happens sometimes. So today what we want to work on is a few things. First of all, we're going to talk about what is a team? How do they form? There's a lot, what you may not realize or had really thought about is some of your people in your firm belong to multiple teams. So we're going to look at how do you analyze that, what's going on with the multiple teams that are going on. What are the issues that the teams face? What are the common things that we see, the challenges that teams face, and the problems that seem to keep occurring over and over again that you might have to deal with in the teams? How are you measuring your teams? And actually, the way that you measure them can actually cause them to have more problems. Your organizational structure and how does that impact their performance? What can you do to turn a team around? And I'm sure that's why most of you are on this presentation today. What can I do to turn the team around? And then we're going to talk about a couple things at the end in terms of what would you want to do next? What are your next steps that you can take to try to help improve your team's performances? For those of you who don't know me, many of you I do know. Some of you are clients who I've worked with. Maybe you've taken our training program. Maybe I worked with you back in the old days when we did Dell Tech. I'm known across the industry for my book, Find the Lost Dollars, as Leanne mentioned, and since then have develop a training program around my book, Find the Lost Dollars. And that's pretty much what I do every day. I work with firms, A&E firms, to help them improve their business management practices, assess what's going on in their companies, turn around groups of people who aren't performing. We work on helping firms improve their culture so that their employees are focused on profitability, and also help them implement new best practices, processes, procedures, and implement systems that are going to help them to make more money. I learned most of what I learned over 25 years of working as a Dell Tech consultant, and have over 28 years in the industry. And so I've actually worked with it's probably been over 700 A&E firms over the last 28 years. So I've had a lot of exposure to see what companies do and how lots of small changes in your practices and in your people can make a big difference in your profits. And so today, a lot of what we're going to talk about is your profits. And when you think about underperforming teams, very often what you're talking about is they're not performing. They're not hitting their goals. They're not hitting their profit margins that you want them to. And so we're going to look at how do you measure them and how do you improve that? So how do your teams form? Teams very often are not, you may have created some of your teams. You may have teams formed by discipline or office or market sectors. You may have studios of teams, groups of people that always work together. You might have all these different situations, but teams very often form based on formal and informal methodologies. Your formal ones are the ones you create, but you may have informal teams. Some of your teams may have formed because they sit at lunch together, or they are on a softball team in your company that play on a team together, and they really don't really work together, but they've created these relationships. Or maybe they've worked on proposals. Maybe they're on a board of directors, and that's their way of being on a team, but they're not actually working on project teams together. So there's various ways that teams form. And because of that, there may be different dynamics that are going on with those teams, relationships, responsibilities, where they don't actually have any reporting structure or measurement of how they're doing, but because they work together or they have relationships together within your offices, that can affect the overall performance of different groups of people and how they interact with each other. And so when you think about your teams, keep in mind that one employee can belong to many different teams. And so how you communicate with them regarding their performance, etc., might affect other relationships and other things that are going on within those groups. And I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way, but I see that happening in a lot of firms. Like you might have an executive team, and that executive team impacts the behavior of many other teams. And so maybe try to think about all the different teams that are in your company and what those relationships are. You may have teams of people that are grouped by role. So you have your executive teams, your marketing and sales groups, project managers that all may meet for different things. You have finance and HR, you have your technical staff, who as a group, they think of themselves as part of a role of people. And so these roles, there may be job descriptions, there may be responsibilities that are related to your role in the company that aren't actually measured in that role team, but that comes into play in how they behave, how they perform, how they get along with each other. And so you have teams by role. You may also have teams of people that work together because they're all in the same office. And so just being in the same location, working together in the same office, different offices tend to get their own way of thinking. They create their own processes. They all do things alike. For example, in your Denver office, you might have 3 different teams of people who work on different types of projects, but when it comes to billing at the end of the month, there may be a way of doing billing in our office. And that way of doing billing may be different than how your Virginia office or your Texas office or your California office does their billing. And so what you see is based on these office silos, they may do things differently. And that may be frustrating to you if you're in the corporate office and you're trying to figure out why a certain office underperforms, or a certain groups of teams at other remote locations, it may be because of those office relationships or this office way of doing things. And it can be kind of frustrating. Then you may have regions. And so let's say you have a regional director, and that regional director is in charge of multiple groups or teams within that region. And again, they may be measured as a group. And so they, may have a different way of functioning. They may have, because of being in a different part of the country, they may have different types of clients. They may have different ways of thinking. They may have different kind of colloquial ways of doing business. I recently did a meeting in the Deep South, and I found that in the Deep South, they had really different ways of approaching meetings. There were different kind of customs in how people dress, how people behave, customs that come into play that affect your different ways of thinking. And it's really interesting to look at that and see how that may be affecting their different performance. Also, when you think about your regions, think about, is there competition between the regions? Sometimes if you have competition, they may not get along with each other because they're competing and they don't feel that it's necessary to work together in any way. And that can cause some issues. Competition can be very good for certain teams, and it can also affect, it can also be negative in that they're not helping each other. And then you have your projects and your project teams. And what I really like about this slide is that I find that many firms have what I call, or what many call, a matrix structure. And that is, you have different project managers and you have different groups of people. And so you may have different employees that actually work for different managers on different projects. And when we're doing our business management assessment of companies, and that's an anonymous assessment, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation, because we use that assessment to figure out what's really going on in companies. And in that assessment, you can break down your results by groups. And what we see is different groups end up getting different scores in their assessment. And that's because of a lot of things that we just talked about. They do things differently, or they're competing with each other. But what's really interesting is sometimes our clients, when they're doing the assessment, do it by role. And then what you find is there's certain roles of people who are frustrated. For example, one of the common things that I see is they tell me that, well, I report to many different project managers, and I struggle with understanding what my priorities are, because this manager's telling me their work is more important, and another manager's telling me that this work has to get done today. And on a regular basis, I'm struggling to try to make everyone happy, and I don't know which things are higher priority. And many employees struggle with that across your company. And if they do report to different team managers or team group leaders, they may be having that problem. And one way you can find out about that is to ask them, which is what our assessment does. So they may be confused, what is my chain of command? Who do I really report to? That can be an issue with your teams in terms of your employees being confused about what they should be doing and who really is their main boss or their supervisor. And then you may also have disciplines. And even because of the nature of the disciplines, your employees may find that things work differently in different disciplines. And your disciplines might be, geotech versus bridge inspections versus water resources or construction management. Those are really different types of work that they do. Because of the different types of work that they do, they may have challenges associated with that type of work. For example, there may be more field people in one team than in another. There may be people that are less educated. There may be people who don't have as much supervision. There may be people who spend many, many hours a day working on 20 different projects where other groups might only work on one project a day. So because of the discipline that they're in and the types of teams that they're on, and projects that they're on, you may find that it's a lot harder for them to make money, or it's a lot harder for them to perform or to be highly utilized for that matter. And so because of that, you may have to figure out different ways of helping them to be more successful. And also you may have to figure out different ways of measuring them. The traditional reporting structure that you use may not be as effective for them. They may even need completely different metrics to figure out what their real goals should be and whether they're performing or not. And next we have your markets. So a trend that I'm seeing in the architecture, engineering, environmental industries and construction industries as well, is that many firms are doing reorgs right now. I think I've talked to 5 clients in the last even few days, I think. I was talking to 2 clients today, actually, that told me that they'd just gone through a major reorganizational structure. And they're moving towards, I'd say for the most part, what I hear is many firms are moving away from a kind of office or region way of measuring their teams to a market structure. And that's because they want to have all the employees in a group focused on the same client markets and client industries. So, residential, transportation, education, healthcare, commercial, energy, water. These are all the things that our clients work on. And so it can be a lot of work, doing one of those reorganizational structures. And you really have to sit through and think about, if you're doing a reorg, how do we make these new organizational groups successful? Because they may report to different people, they may have different reporting goals. You may now have one office with multiple groups in it, whereas in the past they were being measured by office. So they were all kind of, okay, everybody in this office works together and they're working towards these goals. And now you have 3 groups or 10 groups with different market structures in one office. So now they're all the people in one office have different goals. And that can be very confusing to your employees. And it can be actually a lot of work for your accounting department to try to figure out how to reorganize your overhead rates and all of those other things that are going on. So we're going to talk in a few minutes about some additional challenges with org structures. And I think I might have a couple ideas for you at the end, or as we move towards looking at how to fix these problems, to really help you address these kinds of challenges that you might have. And then you have acquisitions. In the chat box, if any of you want to let me know, have you done any acquisitions? Have you had challenges with your acquisitions? I hear very often from our clients that they struggle with integrating an acquisition into their company. Very often the newly acquired company, they don't want to give up their processes. They don't want to give up their independence. They don't want to give up the way that they've been doing things. They may even be resentful that they have to change their name, change their email address. They may not, it may just be very, very hard to get them comfortable with being part of the new organization. And so that whole change management process that you're putting people through can be very difficult for them. And there definitely are some best practices that you can put in place. You know, I think I recently read a Harvard Business Review article, and it said that 90% of acquisitions fail in some way. So it's that they fail to meet the acquiring company's goals in the first few years. They may fail to meet revenue goals. They may fail to meet profitability goals. It can be quite stressful for the new people to become part of a new company after they may have been doing things the same way for 30 years. Or maybe the leadership that was at the old company, maybe the reason they sold their company was they really wanted to retire. They really wanted to get out. And as part of the deal with the new company, they're being forced to stick around and they don't really want to. And so you're not really getting them at their best. And they may actually feel protective of their employees and the way that things were done in the past, and the reasons that they did things in the past, and so they may resist change as well. I don't know if any of you have experienced any of that. I'm hoping to offer you some ideas for how you can deal with some of those situations. So maybe some of your groups in your company are self-selected. And what does that mean? That means that there's groups of people in your company that hang out together. You know, maybe they go out together after work for drinks or have lunch together on a regular basis. Maybe they talk about things. And, you know, these groups may not have any reporting structure associated with them. They may not have any goals or metrics, but they may influence the groups that they're in because of their way of thinking or their way of behaving. And they may like each other and want each other to succeed when it may not be in the best interest of the company. So an example of that may be very often you'll see project leaders or project managers that always want the same people on their team. And that may be in conflict with who really should be on the team. Maybe that team really should have some less expensive people on it. Maybe that team really needs people with different skill sets on it. But because there's certain people that they like or they trust, they always pick other people to be on their team that really shouldn't be on the team. And what happens is it affects the budget for that project, and it may also cause other people who should have been on the team to be underutilized. So there may be some dynamics like that going on that you hadn't even thought about that you may have to address and deal with. So let's talk for a minute about what does it mean to be an underperforming team? How do you measure your teams? You know, one definition is they're not hitting their targets. So you set goals for your team. Maybe they're not achieving those goals. It could be utilization goals, profit goals, revenue goals. But by and large, underperforming means they're not hitting their goals. It could just mean they're not hitting their potential. You know, you might have some really amazing people and they're just not, you know, they could be doing better. You know, they could be more, they could be doing a better job. Your project managers may not be managing at the level that you were hoping they would be. And so, you know, if you have one underperforming team, then chances are it's the team and it's something going on in that team. If you have more than one underperforming team, it could be, there could be other factors at play, right? Maybe And we're going to talk about what all those factors could be. It could be things that are going on in the company. It could be, other factors. So let's go through, what those challenges could be that are affecting the performance of your team, and look at, and then we're going to talk about what you can do about it. So first of all, we have leadership. And I think really everything starts and ends with leadership. If you don't have strong leadership on your teams, then your teams may flounder. They don't know what they should be doing every day. They don't know what priorities they have. They may not be getting feedback as to how they're doing, and so they may just keep doing the same bad behaviors over and over again. So leadership really is probably one of the most important aspects of your teams, and there needs to be a way to measure how effective your leaders are. Do they have the right skills? Do they have the right communication? Are they, meeting with people on a regular basis? Are they, how are they holding people accountable? All of those things that you need to measure in a team. Do you have the wrong leaders? Do your leaders need more professional development in order to be leaders? Sometimes people get promoted into a leadership role that they're not ready for. And I hear that all the time about project managers. Project managers become project managers very often because they have 8 years experience. So they should know how to manage a project. But now they have new responsibilities like business development or hiring, or dealing with client relationships, things that they may never have had training on, developing scopes and estimates. There's dozens and dozens of new responsibilities that your leaders may have that they're not cut out for. And they also actually may have some challenges with time management, because before they may have had a goal, to be a certain level of utilized, and now they have to make sure that 10 people are utilized, and they don't know how to divide up their time between all of the responsibilities that they have, and really what they should be focusing on. So leadership is a big area. And so one of the things I'd like you to do, I'm going to be kind of naming a bunch of these areas of challenge, and I want you to kind of keep track. If you're taking notes, keep track of how many of these you are dealing with. And I'm going to I'd love to hear from many of you, but how many of these challenges are you dealing with? So leadership would be one of them. The next may be teamwork. So maybe the members of the team just don't work well together. Maybe there's conflicts. They disagree. Maybe there's a power struggle. They all want to be leaders, and maybe there's passive aggressive behavior going on in the team. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Maybe there's a lack of trust, and there can be a lot of reasons for that. Some backstabbing going on, or competition that's causing people to not work well together. And if you have that going on, then you really need to focus on some team building and really getting to the root of the problem to understand. And again, that's part of what our assessment tool tries to figure out. What are the challenges and the struggles that people in your company are dealing with that are keeping them from doing their best work? And then you have your mission, your vision, and your values. And, really what this comes down to is what makes people come to work every day. And is the reason that your people working in your company, is it in line with your company's mission and vision? And do you all hold the same values about what's important? For example, if what's important to you are, client relationships, quality, making clients happy, safety, or maybe it's maybe your mission is making the world a better place, or designing beautiful work. there's all these things that companies hold as their values, but maybe your employees don't hold those same values. Maybe it's more about what's in it for them, or maybe they're not tying their goals in life back to what the company's goals are, and so they don't feel inspired, they're not engaged, and that can cause people to underperform on a regular basis. So it needs to be communicated regularly, and also it has to be part of your hiring process and part of how you communicate with your teams. And attitude is really a very important part of what makes people successful, and how they feel about coming to work every day. The next area is, do you have some dysfunction going on with the people? Again, this might go back to the teamwork and why certain teams aren't working together. So you may have this dysfunction where you have different people with different agendas. And if you end up with people that are kind of in it for themselves, they don't understand, why your company is in business, how important it is for your company to make a profit and be financially sound, and how that ties back to what's in it for them, then they may all be just kind of out there operating in their own agenda. And I love this one about passive aggressive, because passive aggressive is a trait that I find very, very common in many A&E firms. And the way I define it, which may not be the same way that everybody defines it, but passive aggressive is kind of where people will say one thing to your face and then say something else behind your back. Or another example of passive aggressive is when people will put something in an email to you, but then in person they'll never say it out loud. And that is an indication that people do not feel safe to say how they really feel. And that's, again, why an anonymous assessment can be a really valuable tool, because then people will be more honest and tell you honestly how they feel about things and what's working and what's not working. Passive aggressive can be very dangerous. One of the ways you can tell if there's a lot of passive aggressive behavior in your firm or in a group of people is sarcasm. If you consistently see that people are using sarcasm to communicate, very often that is a way of people telling the truth, but they think humor is covering it up. And it isn't. I don't think it is. I feel like sarcasm can be very dangerous way of communicating because it's covering up the truth, or people think it's covering up the truth, but it isn't. What they're actually saying in those jokes is the truth. And if you really listen to sarcastic people, you'll hear them telling the truth to you over and over again. So think about that. Is there a lot of sarcasm? Or do you have one group that's always really sarcastic? Because that can indicate some issues there. So you may have silos in your company. And a funny word that I hear being used over and over again is fiefdoms. People describe, well, we have these fiefdoms of people, and basically that is indicated by groups of people that don't want to work with other people. They like working independently. They like the way they do things. They think the way they do things is better than the way everyone else does it. They're not necessarily interested in helping other groups to succeed. And that may be because of the way they're incentivized, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But silos can be very, very difficult to break down. And, I often see they can be, very often it can be a geographic issue. You have an office and people may be very remotely separated from other people. And very often they don't even feel like they're part of the company. They could have been part of an acquisition, or they may be an acquisition that was made, and they just never, they've never really learned how to affiliate themselves into the rest of the company. And it does take a lot of work. I have a few ideas about how you can break these silos down. It takes a lot of work. And in a few minutes, I'm going to start giving you some of my ideas and suggestions about how you do that. Whoops. Back to silos. I have some ideas how you can do that, but being aware of the silos is the first step of doing that, and getting people to admit that they have silos, and that there can be some issues or problems associated with having silos where, you know, you have so much inconsistency across the organization. And so another cause of problems that you may have as a result of an underperforming team is you may have some troublemakers. And for anybody who's kind of in my age group, may recognize who this person is on the screen. This is Dennis the Menace. You may have, I'm curious, do you all have Dennis the Menaces in your company? Do you have people in your company who, you know, they're just constantly causing problems? And, you know, they may be, I like to call them drama queens. They may be constantly just driving you crazy, and you're having to deal with their issues all the time. And, you know, one drama queen or one troublemaker can destroy a team, because they're constantly questioning everything that's going on. They may always be disagreeing with authority, or they're disagreeing with corporate, or they're disagreeing with whoever, you know, is giving them instructions. But you need to identify your troublemakers and deal with troublemakers a little bit differently than you deal with other people. And so in a minute, we're going to talk about that. I think you know what some of the options are. And then you may just have teams that are just so radically different from everyone else, you just can't measure them or treat them the same as everyone else. And I think it's important to recognize them. So they may be different because of the type of work they do. Maybe they're not really, like maybe everyone in your company is a professional services group, and you have one group that are a bunch of software programmers, and they work on internal projects. They don't work on client-facing projects. And so everyone else looks at that team and says, you know, why do they get to do this, or why are they like that? Or you may look at their utilization or their numbers and say, well, you know, they're just not, they're not cutting it. They're not, everyone else has 65% utilization and they have 40 or 0 or whatever it is. Or we don't like people who work on overhead projects. Whatever it is, there may be issues with those kinds of teams, and you may have to treat them differently. And then, you know, so really what we want to talk about here are, you may just have groups, you may have underperforming groups of people that just, the biggest problem they have is they just don't follow your processes. You know, across the board. It may be because they have these silos. It may be because they were an acquisition. But this may be the biggest issue that you have with them, is that they're just not, they just won't do what anybody else in the company is expected to do. If you have a go, no-go process, they won't use it. If you have a extra services approval form, they won't fill it out. If you have a CRM system and you're trying to track your opportunities, they won't update your opportunities. They won't set projects up the same as everyone else. They go ahead and start working without a contract, even though that is against your company's rules. The way that they hire may be differently. The way that they onboard people isn't according to your company's policies. maybe everyone in your company is required to do daily timesheets, but they don't enforce those processes, and they let people do whatever they want. And it can be chaotic for your company to have groups of people, and then you may have other people in your firm that are very resentful of people that are constantly getting away with it. And that comes to my last item, which is accountability. Accountability is the glue that holds all of this together. I like this quote. It ties commitment to results. Commitment to achieve the company's goals and individual goals and team goals to the results that they end up with. And I think this is a really important point. And ultimately, accountability is what you're going to end up having to deal with to get some results from these teams. So how do you measure your teams? You know, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you have groups of people that don't have any metrics at all, you know, I was talking to a very large firm the other day with over 1,000 employees, and they told me that their policy, their internal policy, is not to measure people. They have zero metrics at the individual level, and they have zero metrics actually at the team level. They only measure at the company level. And I said, well, if you don't measure people, how can you fix problems? How do you know who's performing and who isn't performing? How do you know who to promote and who to get rid of? And do people feel like their bonuses are based on actually anything that they did, or are their bonuses discretionary? And if you give people discretionary bonuses, you may or may not get the behavior that you expect or want out of them. So how should you be measuring your people? Well, let's look at some of the common metrics and measurements. You've got revenue. Revenue is an okay measurement. It's a reasonable place to start, but you can end up having significant increases in revenue that don't actually end up in any additional profit to the firm. So revenue, people love to celebrate increases in revenue. Yeah, you know, let's celebrate. We hit, you know, $1 million more this year in our group, but profit is exactly the same as it was in the old revenue. That really isn't that beneficial to the company. That can mean a lot of problems. It can mean you're going after the wrong projects. You have terrible clients. You're not managing projects very well. It can mean a whole lot of problems, but revenue alone can't tell you enough. So you ultimately need to look at costs and profit in those teams. Is the cost and profit going up in accordance with your revenue increases? And so you can have these great increases in revenue, but profit isn't going up. And then I would argue that that is underperforming if that is the case. And it can also be due to a lack of focus on what are the right numbers to be looking at. Maybe they're too focused on revenue and not focused enough on profit. And then you have utilization. Many firms focus on utilization and should be, I believe, focused on utilization. But you also have to make sure that if you're looking at utilization, that you're also looking at profit. If you only look at utilization, you will find that people will be highly utilized, because what they will do is just start charging their time on their timesheets to whatever projects they can find to charge them to. And that may not correlate with what they were really doing or what they should have been doing. And only by looking at project profitability can you also figure out whether your utilization and your project profitability are aligning with each other. And that's really ultimately what you're looking for. So if you're measuring your team's performance just on revenue or utilization, then you're really missing the boat, because your project profits could be suffering because of that. And then you have cash flow. I've actually seen divisions of companies that their revenue's going up, their profit on an accrual basis is going up, but they have these terrible clients that aren't paying them, and their cash flow is horrible, and they're not collecting the money, and you know, ultimately they could go out of business because of that. So you also have to be looking at cash flow. Are your clients paying? Do you have good clients that are paying you on a timely basis? And then you need to also be looking at backlog. And backlog's very important because, you know, backlog's going up, it's going down, and it basically shows you how many more months left of work you have. And so if you're looking at your teams, do they have enough work to carry them out through the next 3 to 6, 12 months? Or are they burning through the money too fast and they don't have enough work, you know, coming up in the next 60, 90 days, and they're going to be hitting a wall, basically. And, you know, what are you going to do about that? Are they selling enough? And then, you know, you also need to look at trends. Is the trend of your team going up or down? Is their profitability increasing, meaning maybe they're improving their performance, or is their profitability going down and their performance is actually decreasing? So that's an important thing. And then, of course, you always need to be looking at sales. Do they know how to sell? Is sales something that team is strong at? And so that should be another number that you're looking at. What is their win rate? How many, you know, new projects are they getting per quarter, per month, per quarter? Is their win rate going up and down? And are they winning enough work based on what they're spending on proposals and that type of thing? And then you need to look at their talent. And that's where, you know, a good assessment can come in. Do they have the right people? What does their turnover look like? Maybe there's too much turnover. Maybe they can't find the people that they need. And really what your company needs to be focusing on is cross-selling between your different groups. If you consistently have a team of people who don't have enough people to do the work, or they don't have the right skill sets on that team, are they reaching out on a regular basis to other groups and other teams? And are they being incentivized to do that, to bring in other people from the company to help fill those gaps so that their numbers and their revenue numbers can stay where they need them to stay? And then, does that team have happy clients? Very often you can correlate. You can do a kind of a client survey, or a net promoter score is a good way to measure client happiness. And if you don't know what a net promoter score is, if you go read the book, The Ultimate Question, teaches you how to figure out how happy your clients are. Basically, it's based on whether your clients would recommend you to others or not. If your team's net promoter scores are low, that could be an indication of why they may be having different lower numbers than some of your other groups. And then again, you also need to look at communication. How often do they meet? Do they have good kickoff meetings? You know, one really great way is to ask them. One of the things I have found, and I've studied this, is looking at kind of the younger people today, the millennials. They want a lot more feedback. And if you have older leaders and older managers in a group that are working with a lot of younger people, the older people may not have ever been encouraged to share a lot of feedback, to give a lot of recognition. And the younger people want that. And so you may have a conflict there between kind of the older way of doing things, which is, you know, we do an annual review, and that's when you get your feedback. And the younger people that literally, they want feedback all the time, almost every week. How am I doing? What can I be doing better? Tell me how my projects are doing. Tell me how many hours this is supposed to take me to do. Am I doing a good job? They want to hear this all the time. And so you may have a conflict there between the way your managers run their projects or giving information and the way that the people working on your projects want the information. And then another really important thing to look at is your organizational structure. And that is, are you incentivizing people to do the behavior that you want them to do? Are they, for example, if one of the things you really want people to do is share work between offices, when one office has too much work and another office doesn't have enough work, is there an incentive for them to do that? Or do they have their own profit and loss report and their bonus is based on how their group did? I can tell you, if that's how your organization is structured, they're not going to share the work. They're going to figure out how to get their group's work, their group to do all the work. And even if they have too much work, they're going to still hog all that work for themselves, which could be hurting their client relationships because they may be missing deadlines. And they're really maybe struggling with that. And you might find that coming up with a different bonus or incentive reward structure is really an important move that you need to make. Or restructuring your reporting structure is a very important move you need to make to incentivize people to do what you want them to do. And then lastly is reporting. And that is, what reports are you giving people? Do they get the right information? Is your company transparent enough? Do you have a transparent culture where you're sharing the right information with people and they can do their job and manage their projects based on the information that they really need to get, based on their role and the goals that you've given them to hit? If you want them to be focused on profitability, are they getting profitability, the right profitability reports? If you want them, to do certain things, you have to make sure you're measuring them and giving them the data and access to the data. If you're giving them a report at the end of the month, but they need it weekly, that can be a problem. Maybe you need to change how often you give them the report, or maybe you even need to change the structure of the report because they don't even understand how to read the report. So these are all the kinds of things that you need to determine and assess what's going on. So let's talk about some ideas and things that you can do to turn around an underperforming team. I know what all of you want is a championship team. And I believe that sports teams are a very great analogy to business performance, because if you think about it, if you had a football team or a baseball team or an Olympic team or a hockey team, whatever your favorite sport is, if you were the coach of that team, would you put up with people who were not great players? Would you accept mediocrity? Would you be happy with terrible clients, right? Which are basically like terrible coaches or terrible opponents. You wouldn't. And I'm sure if you're a business leader right now, or you're a shareholder in your company, you don't want that. You want your teams and your company as a whole to perform at the highest level possible, just as you would a sports team. And so I think you need to look at your business like a sports team. You should expect the same level of performance from all of your players, which are your employees, and from your individual teams. So I have some things that I want to offer you to figure out how to get those teams to turn around and perform better. Number one, assess what's going on in your team. And again, I explained to you that we have a business management tool. It's an automated anonymous survey where you can look at the 9 areas of your business and focus on where do you need to put your money, your focus, your employee development into to turn around the areas of your company, what are represented in here as red and yellow, the areas of your company that aren't working. And very often, as we talked about, your teams may not be performing because the structure of your company or the processes and systems you have in place aren't working for them. Next, you have your leadership. Do you need to move leaders? Take leaders out? Do you need to train them? Do you need to incentivize them? Do you need to hold them accountable? Do you need to improve some of their skill sets? You know, what is it that you need to do with your leadership? Maybe in some cases, you may have to change your leadership in certain groups of people to ensure that the team is going to be able to survive. Maybe you need more involvement at the corporate level. I know one thing I'm going to recommend to you is to maybe move somebody from a corporate office down into another office or into an acquisition that you've made to be able to get that corporate values and mission and vision incorporated at that level, and maybe a little bit more accountability towards trying to achieve corporate goals. Maybe you gotta fire people. I hate to say that, but we all hate doing that. But sometimes those troublemakers, those drama queens that we talked about earlier, or those underperforming employees, they're bringing everybody else down. And maybe that's part of the problem and you have to fire them. Maybe you need to look at your performance management. You might need the carrot and the stick. Maybe you have too much stick and not enough carrot. Maybe you have too much carrot, not enough stick. What is a carrot and a stick? A carrot is rewards, bonuses, and incentives. A stick is consequences. The ultimate consequence is being fired, but there are a lot of other consequences. Maybe they're demoted. Maybe a project manager shouldn't be a project manager. Maybe there's other things that you're going to take away from them if they don't perform or meet their goals. And you need to look at that. You need to understand how is your performance management process affecting their behavior. Maybe if you have a team of people who are dysfunctional, you need to do some team building, some kumbaya. I don't know how many of you have tried that before. I actually think it's great. And think about doing it between, if you have silos, maybe you bring multiple silos together into team building, and that may help integrate your teams together more so that they're not operating as silos as much. Maybe what your people need is training. Maybe your project managers don't know how to be project managers. Maybe they've never learned how to manage a project. Maybe they've never learned the business side of the business. So they may be great at doing the technical work and even the scheduling of the projects, but maybe they don't know how to do a project budget. Maybe they don't know how to do a scope and an estimate. Maybe they don't know how to do a kickoff meeting. Maybe they don't know how to monitor project budgets and make sure that they have the right people on the projects. They may not know how to do all this. Maybe they all speak a different language, and what you need to do is bring and train people so that they speak a common language. And so, I think really what this all comes down to is, what can you do to help them? And I can promise you one thing for sure, definitely, that if you do nothing, to help them, you're going to get the same results that you got before. So there's definitely things that you can do. Hopefully I've given you at least 3 good ideas today about some things that you might start working on, and work towards that. I just want to take 1 minute to tell you what I do, and then take another minute to tell you about something that you might want to consider talking to me about. So what I do is the business management assessment and training for your project managers, your technical staff, and your leaders, to assess where money's getting lost in your company, to train people. So we have an online training that's 1 hour a week on their own time. And then we do group meetings that are 1 hour a week that focus on specific improvements and changes in behavior that are going to make your company more profitable and get everybody working the same way together. We focus on actually measurable results to increase your win rate, utilization, and project profit margin. And we help you develop effective new processes and systems to make your people perform better. And it is completely guaranteed to increase your profitability. I was just working with a client 2 days ago. They're a 40-person firm, and they told me that after training just 20 people on the Find the Lost Dollars program, they increased their profit from $265,000 to $750,000 in 1 year. And that is significant for a firm that size. It's huge, huge amount of money, way more actually than what we were even targeting. And it's because it had a profound effect on people's behavior and the culture of the company. They're now very, very focused on their project budgets, which they weren't before. And so, you know, this is an example of what our online training program looks like. It's very high-end. Videos, exercises, games, assessments, goal setting, and using your numbers to help your company find the lost dollars. And so my offer to you today is to apply for a 30-minute meeting with me, and we call it the Find the Lost Dollars Profit Analysis, to learn how to tackle 3. We're going to look at what are the 3 main areas where you're leaking profits. We're going to look at how much money we can help you find in those 3 areas. And I promise you, after the 30-minute meeting, you will walk away with at least a preliminary action plan for your next steps to find the lost dollars. And I know some of you right now, you're leaking profits in maybe even every one of your projects. Maybe it's just some of your teams. Even if your teams are making money, maybe they're not making as much money as they could be. And I know that you may have some of you may have leaders in your firm that just think that they can do it themselves, and that's fine. You may have others that really realize they need help, and they know there's a problem and they really want to solve it. And so that's the type of leader we work with. And for that second kind of leader, we've created this profit analysis to help you and in 30 minutes just figure out where is it going to be the best use of your time. And I can't solve all your problems in 30 minutes, but I can give you a few recommendations and maybe an approach that will help save you time and give you a roadmap to find those lost dollars. In this 30-minute call, I will not sell you anything. In fact, I'm not going to let you buy anything from us. The purpose of the call is to figure out whether you can be successful following our program or not. And I am only interested in working with firms that I'm 100% successful. I can be 100% successful working with, because if I can't find you, God, at least $100,000 or way more than that in profit, I'm not interested in working with you at all. So at the end of the call, You can take this profit analysis and throw it away. You can take our recommendations and do it yourself. You can go take the recommendations and go find somebody else to help you implement them, or you can decide to work with us. So you have all four of those options, and if you decide you want to work with us, we can schedule another meeting to decide what that might look like and whether it makes sense for you. So again, you can go to aecbusiness.com/profit-analysis to apply for a 30-minute profit analysis, and we'll look at it and see if it makes sense for you. And you can go ahead and put it on our schedule. And I would love to work with you if you feel like you're committed to helping your company improve and find lost dollars. So, and if you have any questions, Leanne is going to be sending an email out after this, sometime this afternoon, with a link to the recorded webinar and with the URL here on the bottom of the screen, and how you can get a hold of us if you have any questions. So I look forward to meeting with you if it makes sense for you, and helping you find lost dollars in your company. So thank you very, very much.